project. I am privileged to be here today with Vi Watson. Vi moved to the desert in 1928 and since then has been active in many aspects of the Palm Springs community. We are at her home in Palm Springs, and today's date is September 27, 1986. Vi, I mentioned that you moved here almost 60 years ago. What was the exact date?
December the 1st. And about 2 days after I got here, it snowed. And I had always said that when I could outrun my mother, I was going to leave Iowa and go to a warm place where it never snowed anymore, and I didn't have to have any of those whole hot summers where we laid on the floor all the time. So when 2 days after I get here, it snows in Palm Springs.
Had you had any previous conceptions about the desert? Did
No.
you know anything about it?
I didn't know a thing about it, but I was so delighted to think that it was just always going to be nice and warm here.
And where were you from originally?
Iowa. And believe me, that's bad.
Many lovely aspects to Iowa. What were the circumstances for your arriving?
Well, my husband had a position at the Desert Inn, and so we came to Palm Springs, and I taught at the Desert Inn private school.
Right, I do want to talk to you about that. What was your husband's position at the Desert Inn?
Well, he was an assistant clerk, and then we moved to the Oasis Hotel 2 years after that, and he was the night auditor there. And I also taught in the Oasis school then.
That's fascinating. What were your first impressions of the desert when you arrived, other than the snow, once the snow cleared?
Oh, it was lovely, beautiful. And I've never ceased to praise the Lord that I came to the desert that many years ago, because I've had all my life here. It seems almost like I was a native.
Yes, you've been here for some very important years. I am interested in your teaching. It was a private situation. You taught small classes at the Desert Inn. And who were some of your memorable pupils?
Well, Ruth Velour.
Right.
She was Ruthie Roberson, and Betty Kiley, and Betty's brother, Owen, who was killed in the war, in World War II. He was a student. Let's see, Betty and Ruth were both in the 2nd grade, and Owen was in the 6th grade. We had all the grades.
Together. So you taught a variety of...
Yes, it was like the old-fashioned country school idea.
Where actually were the classes?
Well, it was at the Ramada. The Ramada is out in the lawn to the let's see, it'd be the east of the main building of the Desert Inn.
And you taught all subjects? Or
yes, we had. Yes, we had all the subjects. Used the California State School books.
And were the classes outside for the most
Yes,
part?
it was all held in the Ramada. It was just beautiful. Glassed in on 2 sides and a big fireplace, so in the winter, the mornings, the boys would set a nice fire in the fireplace. It was just beautiful. The kids were just great.
And you probably had not just local kids, but visitors.
No, they were mainly
well.
visitors. That was the reason for the Desert Inn having this school. It invited the people to come from the east and the north to spend the winter and bring their children, so they could go to school and carry on with their classes and go back to their own school then, and they wouldn't have lost any time.
Whose idea was this? Was this Nellie Kaufman's
Yes,
idea?
Nellie Kaufman's. It certainly was.
People there, that was very fascinating.
Now the older students that came out, I did private tutoring for. In the afternoon, after the classes, I went to the various bungalows where the high school students were living, and kept up with their work in their eastern schools also. That gave the kids an opportunity while the small ones were in school. The kids could go riding, and everybody was riding horseback in those days.
So the older ones were taught.
They were out riding in the afternoon. They had their classes.
Tell me a little more about the Desert Inn. What was the Desert Inn like as opposed to the El Mirador?
The Desert Inn was the quality hotel in Palm Springs, the hotel. The El Mirador was for the movie stars and the newly rich and so forth, but quality people, the very wealthy people, all stayed at the Desert Inn. Very quiet. They had a trio that played in the concert every evening in the lobby. That was right off of the dining room. And other than that, they had the stables. There were, seems to me, 8 or 10 stables here in town at that time. And everybody was horseback riding or going out on buckboards or something, having fun in the desert. It was the desert that made it interesting.
It sounds like more of a family resort.
It was family oriented. It certainly was. It was entirely different.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Who were some of the local people who also were associated with the Desert Inn? Local personalities working there?
Well, Jimmy Gagey was on the desk, the main or the head clerk there, and Ruth Gagey. She was very prominent here. She was president of the Women's Club at one time, and she played the piano in the Desert Inn Trio. Not too many people that are here now that I remember.
What was you obviously knew Nellie Kaufman rather well.
Oh, she was
darling. Like? Describe her.
A lovely person, very firm. You knew what she said. She would stick by, and she had a flair for making people admire her in all of her decisions.
She really was.
She was really absolutely. Oh yes, everything went through Nellie Kaufman. Even her sons, Mr. Roberson or Mr. Kaufman, all conducted their affairs with and through Nellie.
You moved to the Oasis a couple of years later, so this would be in the 30s. And
yes.
You taught there as well. Was it the same situation? Did you teach?
Yes, but we didn't have as many students, but we had all the classes.
And where was that held outside as well?
No, it was held inside. They had a little wing of the right off of the lobby, and that's where we had the classes there. Also, off of the lobby, there were card rooms and social gathering halls, and there's one place there where they had a big square piano, and every night I went in and played on the piano and sang popular songs. This was about the same idea as the Desert Inn Trio.
Yes, yes.
They had that, and they had me over at the Oasis.
So you were involved musically all over the desert.
Well, I was the only one. That was all.
That is wonderful. Who owned the Oasis at the time?
Hope Garlick. Garlick is spelled.
Yes.
Hobart Garlick. He was a wonderful man.
Involved in various parts of Palm Springs, wasn't he? A civic leader as well?
Yes, he was. He certainly was.
And what was he like? He was
a very genial man, full of charisma, hail fellow, well met, just a real front man.
Yes.
Everybody liked him.
Do you have any memorable pupils from your days at the Oasis or when you did high school tutoring?
Well, the singers from Singer Sewing Machine Company, they brought their children, and I had them. I remember them particularly, and the Marmons were here that built the Marmon cars.
Oh, yes.
And I had their children. Those are the two that I remember the best. I guess because I was so crazy about the children, because there were many, many lovely ones that came, but these children were just precious.
Was Francis Stevens School in existence at the time?
Yes, surely it was.
Other local people children would go there.
Yes, the local
well.
children didn't go to the private schools.
Right.
This was just for the visitors.
Right.
That was the accommodation that the hotel had for the visitors in the Palm Springs area.
Well, they were fortunate to have you as a teacher. They certainly were. You've been an active member for more than 50 years of the Palm Springs Community Church. I wanted to ask you about that. You've been an organist and a soloist in addition to being involved in community activities connected with the church. But you also talk about the days when you went from the Palm Springs Community Church to Our Lady of Solitude.
Our Lady of Solitude.
And you were, the first organist?
Yes. And it was one of those old pump organs, too. If I forgot to pump, it forgot to play. Yes, I was there for several years when Father Lehane was here and also Father O'Connor.
Yes.
And I expect it was about 7 or 8 years that I was there, because when Larry Sitter came to town from Erie, Pennsylvania, I believe he came up to sing in the choir, which I had the choir as well as being the organist, and we had a few stragglers up there. We did pretty well, though, with the few that we had, and Larry came to help, and I thought, this is wonderful. So one day he said, can I play the organ? I said, can you play the organ? I should say you can. I thought, gee, here's a great thing. So all I'll have to do is sing. I don't have to play. And he started playing, and he played there for 50 years. He just retired recently.
Describe your experiences of trying to get from the Palm Springs Community Church, where you were also resident organist and soloist.
Oh, that's right. We had 2 masses in the morning. The last one was out supposedly at 11 o'clock. Well, the community church started their service at 11 o'clock. Well, it was quite a strain to get from one to the other. It was a few blocks.
Yes.
But the old police station and the fire station and the telephone company were right in the next block on Palm Canyon.
Church at this time?
Well, it was, we had, well, you know, the small church across the street from the big church now on Bristow and Kauai. Yes. We had just built that one. And that's where I had to get to by 11 o'clock. So Dr. McCartney would watch for the, I had a place fixed for me to park my car, and I would rush from Our Lady of Solitude and hoping that the last Mass was over in a hurry and I could say Et Cum Spiritu Tuo, and down the stairs I'd fly, get in the car, which is parked right in front of the Catholic Church, and tear down the street, and the police were, have said many times, they laughed when they heard me coming around that corner.
They knew who it was.
Going down through town. There wasn't many people downtown anyway.
You didn't encounter too much traffic.
Not much traffic. And I think they'd see to it that I didn't, but it was funny. And I'd get down there in time to get up and do the beginning of the service at the community church. I did that Sunday after Sunday, and it was a lot of fun.
Did you ever do the same?
I'm always confused.
You are not confused, no. That you are not. You had a small baby. Your daughter was a baby at the time. Did she often go with you to the...
Oftentimes, especially in the evening, I always laid her on the floor and played the organ. And she could look through the banister or in the Catholic Church, and I do all those services. And then at the community church, Mrs. McCartney always took care of her when she was little.
So
somebody took care of her.
Attended the services at a very, very young age.
That's right.
Yes. Who were some of the personalities? There were many civic leaders who were also leaders in the Palm Springs Community Church. What were some of the names associated?
Mr. Licken, from the very beginning, was one of the mainstays, and a chief elder a long time. And Jack Williams was one of the main ones there. And
I'm not familiar with that name.
Well, you know, Don Williams is his father.
I see. Any of the Hicks? Was Alva Hicks?
Well, the Hicks were very prominent at Our Lady of Solitude.
I see.
And we did a lot of things in conjunction with the Catholic Church. This was one of the nice things about Palm Springs. In the early days, everything centered around the little old church right in the middle of town where the Carnell building is now. And now at Christmas time, the whole community Christmas tree was put in the lawn of the church, of the community church. And we had a little program out there and around the tree. But we had a pageant that we worked on each year, or a little skit. And I remember that Alva Hicks was one of the wise men, and he's one of the main ones at the Catholic Church, but that didn't make any difference. He was,
it truly was
and
a
Harold,
community effort.
that's right. Harold Hicks was the was Joseph, I know, and Mr. Licken's niece was Mary, and that's when Joe Henderson and Harry Reed used to help me pump the organ. And so we had to have room in the front of this little church in order to put on this little pageant. So they had kind of something built up outside the back door of the church where the music was to come from. So Harry Reed and Joe Henderson were out there trying to pump the organ and keep things going, and old Joe leaned too hard on one end of the organ, and the organ started going down through there. Well, it's held up the pageant for a little bit, but it was a scream. More things happened at that church.
And this was in the 30s, and
yes, in the 30s.
Everyone in the community involved? Did the Indian population attend?
Well, they certainly did. They sent all their children up there for all the bags of popcorn that we fixed at Christmas time and everything like that. Of course, they did have the little Guadalupe church.
Yes.
But when anything was going on in community affairs, the Indian children were there the same as the white children. We had a wonderful time.
I may be regressing a little bit. I'm going back to the late 20s and when you arrived in the early 30s. What was the general living like?
Well, I lived in a flap house, the first house I lived in.
Not a flop house, a flap house.
That's it, flap, F-L-A-P. You lifted the flaps in the daytime as soon as the sun came up in the morning to warm them up, because all we had was a little kerosene heater that you carried around like they used to have up in the mountain cabins. Yes. Carried that around from room to warm it up a little. But as soon as the sun came out, it warmed up the whole flap house. That was canvas flaps that you pulled a cord from the inside.
Yes, it almost sounds like the present-day camping equipment.
That's exactly right.
Using. Cooking. What were your stoves, your source of heat, your stoves?
Kerosene.
And shopping, everyone just go to Lickens or
went to Mr. Cornell. Was it Mr. Cornell was one of them. Mr. Bosworth had the first grocery store in part of Lickens, which is now the, it was the area of the hardware, was really a grocery store at that time.
So that was cordoned off to somebody else.
And then the opposite side was the post office.
Yeah.
Mr. Licken was the postmaster, of course.
I know,
and
jack of all trades.
Yes, he was. And if anyone wanted to telephone down to any guest at the Desert Inn, they called Mr. Licken, who had the phone, and he'd go across the street and tell them at the Desert Inn that there was a call for so-and-so, and then they'd come back over later on and call through San Bernardino. That was our first telephone connection.
So he really had his pulse on the community.
But the way everybody got word to people in town was a billboard that was out in front of the post office. And if you wanted to see somebody, you put a note out there, and of course everybody came to that every day, and they would get in touch with you. Or if you wanted to sell anything, if you wanted to do anything at all, or ask Joe if he wanted to go someplace tomorrow night, why, he'd leave a note for you there. Everybody saw it.
Were you aware of a lack of privacy, or was it a very comforting feeling to be?
It was just like a big...
Everybody was family almost.
a big family almost. That's true. Yeah, everybody knew everybody, and we never locked a door. In fact, I've gone away for the summer and come back and walked right in the front door and never even thought of locking a door.
And you were away for several weeks?
We'd go away every summer, right after Easter. Easter was the end of things in Palm Springs.
The demarcation line.
Yes.
What about cooling off? I'm regressing again, but we talked about sources of heat, and even in at Easter time,
yes.
it could be rather warm.
That's right. We had a galvanized iron tub that we sat in the middle of the living room, and we opened up the windows, put a sheet into the tub, which was filled with water, and then put it out and pulled it out and stuck it with nails up over the window. So if there's a breath of air coming through, it would come through a wet sheet, and that would cool us down. That's the only kind of air conditioning we had in the very beginning.
There was an iceman.
Oh, we had an iceman. We really did have one. He came once a week. And I can't remember for sure, but I think he came on Friday or something like that. But anyway, he came from Banning and came in a little truck with burlap over the chunks of ice. By the time he drove to Palm Springs over that washboard road and the heat and came down here and went around and delivered these chunks of ice, we put them in a little ice box. By the end of the day, there wasn't any ice. That was once a week.
Yes.
So if you wanted to have company at all, you better have them that day by noon. So you'd have some ice.
That was on a Friday?
I think it was on a Friday. I can't remember for sure. But it was one day a week that we got ice. And it was, by the time you cooled the ice box down, which was boiling hot, you see there wasn't much ice left.
Everyone had to be very innovative about it.
We were. We had an orange
and
crate
cool.
that we hung out in the back, right behind the house. There was a big palo verde tree there, and I hung an orange crate over it, in it, and put burlap over it and dripped water on it. And that was our cooling for butter or something like that. And you could only keep it for one day anyway.
Yes.
Milk for one day. And you shopped every day.
Absolutely.
That's another reason for going to town. You not only shopped, you and got the mail
You had to have your
and
day's
anything.
provisions.
That's right.
You also worked at Lippin's, did you not?
Yes,
Along
I was
with
a
everybody
cashier.
else.
Absolutely, cashier there.
For a number of years? Or?
Yes, for several years. I don't remember how long. I was maybe 6 or 7 or something like that.
Were you there when, as you call her, Henny?
Heine Parker.
Henrietta Parker was there as well. A lot of people passed through Lippin's
Yes.
store.
Oh, yes. Helen Krebs was one of the main ones. And Mrs. Licken worked there in the store, too. And, of course, Tom Kiley and Earl Licken came from Fargo, North Dakota, and came to work while I was there. So we all knew each other very well. They were in the hardware department, and I was the cashier, so everything centered that way. But Tom was a great guy, and Earl doesn't live here anymore. He moved to Glendale.
You must have been familiar with all of the Palm Springs landmarks. I'm thinking of the Indianoia building particularly, since you had close associations later on.
Yes, I certainly did.
I'm fascinated. It was an Indian, it had Indian wares, and it was, in a sense, a trading post?
It was, Indianoia Trading Post. It was built the same year that we came here in 28. It seems that Mrs. Watson was sick and tired of all the Indian things that Mr. Watson had been collecting. This was his hobby after he moved to California from Topeka, Kansas. So she told him to get that stuff out of the house. She wasn't going to have it around there anymore, and so he put it down in the basement. They lived on Ocean Avenue there in Long Beach.
Oh, yes.
So he said, well, all right, he'd put it someplace. So he took a little tour around the desert, and he saw Palm Springs and thought it was a great idea. And he said they needed an Indian store here, and that's where he'd put his Indian stuff.
It's very valuable.
So they built yes, he had been collecting for a long time. So they built that in the Indianoia. And it took about a year, I think, to hear them tell it and building. And then he hauled all that stuff down from Long Beach. And after they had been down here for the season 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 seasons, Mrs. Watson then said she was sick and tired of staying up there alone all that season and let him come down here, so she'd moved down too. So they sold a place in Long Beach and they moved down in the back of Indianoia. There was a little house that they built in the back there. So, but that part of the place was a museum, Indian museum. One wing of it was jewelry. One wing was rugs, and those were the days when rugs were very popular, and so many people bought Indian rugs here in Palm Springs. Like they had hundreds of them stacked in there.
Very, very valuable goods.
Yes, it became very valuable later.
They must have had quite a collection.
Quite a collection is right.
What did you do with your daughter? How did she grow up? Was she involved with music? And
yes, she was.
Were her activities growing
well,
up
and she graduated from Palm Springs High School in '49 and went to Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri, where I went too. And then she graduated from the University of California at Santa Barbara, and then started flying for TWA and went to New York and was based in New York and married a New Yorker, and she still lives in the East.
But misses her desert home.
She says that as soon as she can possibly make it so that her husband will retire, they're moving back to California. She's never gotten over living here. Of course, she was born and raised right here.
Right. And what did she do as a young child? Did she?
She had a lot of music.
Lessons.
A lot of music.
Other than mother.
Yes, she had music lessons. Holly Bicel was one of her teachers, and Alex Hammond was another. And she did a lot of work in town in singing and in drama. And
she attended Francis
Stevens School.
And the high school was in existence, of course, when she was
Yes, it was here. They didn't have to send the kids to Banning like they did in the early days.
What about some of your recreational activities? What did you do for fun?
Horseback riding. That was the first and foremost thing.
Day and night, I understand.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Had wonderful programs where everybody go out in a hay rack and go out to different coves around Palm Springs, and they had the cowboy singers and so forth and so on.
Were there night activities and moonlight rides and
yes,
so forth?
That went on.
Who were some of the people that
Well, Johnny Boyle was one of the main ones. But the different hotels, like the El Mirador, the Oasis, and the Desert Inn, they sponsored these hay rides or breakfast rides and things like that. And then, of course, there were 2 organizations that started up here. The Los Compadres was one, and the Desert Riders.
Yes.
The Desert Riders was very prominent. And
so you would do a lot of horseback riding as well.
We all did. Yes. You might as well be dead as be out of style, in those days.
You described going to Garnett.
Oh, that was the greatest thing in the world, absolutely. Well, we would get in the car at night and drive over to Garnett Station and sit out there to watch the train come through. And when we got over there would always be 4 or 5 other cars loaded with people. We had something to do in the evening, instead of walking the streets or visiting people's homes. We all went to Garnett and watched the train come in, see who got off the train and who got on and things like that. That was a great thing.
What about the local clubs? Did you
Well,
partake in any of the
many of them.
clubs?
The Women's Club.
No, I
was
mean
one
in terms of nightlife.
Nightlife.
Yes.
Oh, I'll bet that you know about the cane breaks.
I'm interested in hearing
That was
about that. No one else has mentioned that. I think
Oh, the
that's
cane breaks.
interesting.
That was here when we came. It was out off of Vistacino. It would be on Vistacino on the right-hand side, almost to Sunrise Way, and you can still see some of the cane is still there. It was
And
a
the name comes
fence
from
around it. Were
sugarcane.
break.
Sugarcane.
And the cane grew up and made a kind of a fence around this place, and it was called cane breaks.
What was the atmosphere like?
Well,
The
just
ambience?
people met there and had
Was it a
beer.
small building?
Yes, just a little,
Informal, casual
That's
setting?
right.
Music?
Ride out. Yes, they had music, and ride out on horseback and go in and have fun, or you could drive out or hike or something.
Would visitors be there? More local people.
No, this
who
was
knew
for
about it.
localites.
Right.
No visitors. The visitors would go to the Dunes, which was out farther in a very ritzy place, and the 21 Club in Cathedral City was
Yes.
another one. But both of them were really set up for visitors. They didn't enjoy having local people come out there at all. In fact, you had to have a real inn to get in one of those places because they didn't want local people losing their money, employees and working people go out and lose all their money, which was very understandable.
Yes, they weren't being exclusive or elitist.
They really had,
practical.
it was guarded very carefully.
Did you, any memorable evenings at Francis Stevens School, which also doubled as a place of entertainment?
Always went on Saturday night to the local dance. Everybody was there.
Oh, this went on
This was
every
great.
Saturday.
Every Saturday night. And then, of course, when Earl Strebe, who was a bellboy at the Winter Garden, decided that we needed a moving picture machine down here somehow and a movie, we all had to go to Banning or Indio to see a movie, or San Bernardino. But Earl rented a machine and put it up in the Francis Stevens School auditorium, which was the convention hall of those days.
I understand the first meeting connected with the city's incorporation.
That's right.
As well. Were you at that meeting?
No, I wasn't.
I was going to ask how you voted.
Well, I was against incorporation from the beginning.
I want to hear about that.
But lots of things went on at the Francis Stevens School. Believe me, it was a center of activity. And a lot of things were started at the Francis Stevens Auditorium, various things in town.
Again, these would have been local citizens who
That's
would have
right.
attended these functions. The Desert Circus, were you ever involved in the
I wasn't.
Circus?
I just attended it. Everyone attended the Desert Circus. And all the events it used to go on for a month or six. Yes, lots of times on floats and things like that. We had, in fact, Licken's store had some of the funniest floats that we ever had in the circus. Oh, it was a big deal in those days. All those events and all of the entries were really wonderful.
Did it attract people from out of town?
Yes, it did. We had crowds. Many people came and early in the morning and was sitting on the street to see that parade. It was really a very fine thing that we had worked up. And then the rodeo too was very prominent in those days. But we wore Western clothes for at least a month, maybe longer than that, before the circus. And we used to work on our floats for a month or two, We'd set them up and plan them, a theme and so forth and so on. I have some of the pictures of it. It's just a scream, like Licken's Follies and all the men that worked at the store were dressed as Follies girls, and they danced on this thing going down the street on the some kind of an apparatus they fixed up with wheels on it so they could dance. Oh, we had lots of things going all the time. It was a community event. It still was like a community family or a big family.
Yes. I do get that feeling as you're talking that, of course, you're so active in present Palm Springs, but you still look back on those days with great fondness.
It was great fondness is right. That's exactly right. We had a wonderful, wonderful city then.
You've been an early member. You mentioned another kind of club, the Palm Springs Women's Club, and you were president twice?
Yes.
And the Palm Springs Women's Club has always been involved in charitable activities. And
yes, that's true.
Tell me a little bit about, for example, Welfare and Friendly
Welfare and Friendly Aid was started there through the church and then moved into the Women's Club.
I see.
And Carolyn Summers was one of the main ones, Carolyn Hicks at that time. And not only Welfare and Friendly Aid, but the Red Cross started.
Oh.
And let's see, cleaning up of Palm Springs and the clear to Cathedral. We went clear to Cathedral City to clean the roadside, and we built the entrance to Palm Springs on the what's that? North entrance to Palm Springs. The Women's Club built the entrance there with the palm trees. The palm trees. There's 3 on one side and 4 on the other.
Did you raise money for this, or did you actually get involved?
Yes, we raised money for all these things, and we all worked like sons of guns too. But it was great.
Who were some of the people that you served, Welfare and Friendly Aid?
Well, some of them, a lot of people came into town hoping that they could live here, and ran out of money, and they needed food, and they needed shelter, and so we took care of that through the Welfare and Friendly Aid.
Where would these people live?
Right on the reservation, which was right uptown. In fact, I remember going out in the wintertime when it was really pretty cold, and there were tents over there, and we took blankets to people that needed blankets, and they had dirt floors. There was no floor in the tent at all, and had drums for stoves to try to keep warm. And we gave food to them, saw that food was taken to them every week. They got them out of town as soon as they could. Urged them to go on to someplace else where they could get something. They had to do that in order to make this a resort. Yes. Because it was becoming there were just a collection of people coming in from Oklahoma and all through the Dust Bowl and all that.
I don't imagine that the Okies would find work here.
They thought they could, but they didn't, you see. It didn't last long. And we had no Negroes in town but one family here for a long time. The Crosleys were the only ones. And but after the war, then we got quite a Negro population, but then there were more people there then. Yes. And so they had work. And mainly Texas Negroes came in. But the Crosleys they didn't even know they were Negro. They were lovely people, and everybody took them in, and I mean, they associated with everybody.
The black population was here before a significant Mexican population.
Well, there were Mexican, yes, I think there were more Negroes before the Mexicans, probably.
Also, your activities, your charitable activities extended beyond the confines of the church in terms of your music and your singing. You went out in the field, so to speak, to sing, and you attended funerals
when Mr. Wetherill was the first pastor that I worked with in the community church, that was in the little church right down in the middle of town. And many a time he and I went down to the Wellwood Murray Cemetery to bury people, and he would talk and I would sing. And many times he took me to the reservation, and we'd go to the little houses where people were dying with tuberculosis. And we'd stand outside the flap houses, you know, where they were right, and sing, and he would talk to them and so forth, comfort them somehow or other. But they, as soon as they possibly could, they told people about the advantages of banning and the height of the...
that was very controversial, because actually the desert was not really good.
Well, and we got most of the people to move up there. It was a strategic move in many ways.
You were part of this?
Well, we did our best. But people were very happy that moved up there, I know, and we didn't need them here, and they were not getting as much good as they could going to a little higher altitude.
This is a bit beyond our time frame, but I feel I should mention the fact that, of course, you are a librarian now at the Palm Springs Desert Museum Library.
Yes.
The library there. And you did work for the Palm Springs Public Library.
Yes, I did, under Dorothy Bear.
Yes.
And then Billy Lou Floan was followed Dorothy Bear.
And what were the circumstances under which you left at that time?
Oh, they said I was too old to work there any longer. And so
this was many years ago.
Yes. Well, you're supposed to quit at 65. And we just kept not saying how many years after that. It was I think I was 69 when finally the state Civil Service Board caught up with us, and Mr. Let's see, who was the city manager at that time? Bluebaugh was one of them, Don Bluebaugh, and anyway, he telephoned Sacramento to see if they wouldn't make an exception in my case, because I was assistant city librarian at the time, and they all wanted me to stay on. I'd been there 13 and a half years, and it seemed I had opened up the Francis Crocker Library and the Melba Bennett Library, and I was back at Wellwood Murray. I'd gone the circle. So they decided that they wouldn't make an exception. They said that all over the state there'd be appeals, you know, to not have this 65 limit. So I left. On Friday they had a big going away party for me and everything. And so Saturday morning I went to work at the Desert Museum. Yes. So I stayed with the books.
Yes. Well, speaking of books, you're a university graduate and you've been a teacher. When you arrived in this area, what was there for you culturally and intellectually? I know you did teach. Did you join? Were there any clubs associated with the early museum or the library, for example?
No, not when I came here. We started all these clubs later.
That was later.
It must have been 10 or 15 years later before we started association with AUW. And then we had to go in with Indio in order to make the first club. And then finally we broke off and had our own AUW here.
But what did you do for your cultural enrichment? Was there anything at the museum in those early days?
No, the museum wasn't started at all then. It hadn't even started.
Did the library have a book club, for example?
Yes, there was a book club. Melba Bennett was the instigator of that. And we used to have the great books. It was very nice. But there were programs that came to town. Now, from the El Mirador, that was one of the things that they sponsored were concerts, and they would have them at various places. There was Raymond Cree's wife was quite artistic, and they lived right across the street from the El Mirador across Palm Canyon, directly across. And their house had a large auditorium type room, large enough for people to get in. Maybe 50 people could get in. And they'd have a singer or a pianist or somebody like that come occasionally. And once in a while, the artist would come and couldn't rehearse, so they would come to my house because this same old piano, they would come and practice on that.
So it was really up to some strong, far-sighted
individuals. That's right.
People in.
Ruth Gagey was one of the main ones that helped, and Marjorie Forline, who was Auntie Pearl's niece. And then, of course, as a tennis club in different places came in, Auntie Pearl had programs up there and so forth. But in the very early days, there was nothing until we just got people to come. The El Mirador was about a year old or something like that. Very new.
Speaking of Melba Bennett and Pearl, you knew all of the early prime players in this community. What were they like? What was Melba Bennett like?
Perfectly charming woman, wonderful charisma, and very able. She was a real promoter. If she wanted to do something, she'd get in and really direct it, get people to help her. Everybody was anxious to help Melba. And the follies that we had, every year she sponsored that.
What were the follies?
Well, they called them the Desert Insanities.
Oh.
And she would get, I know she had dance instructors come from New York City to train all our local people were in there. And it was a great thing. And once a year we had this.
So she had a light side as well as a very serious side.
Oh, absolutely. Melba was wonderful. She did all these wonderful things for the city. Frank Bennett, her husband, they had the Deepwell Ranch. Yes. That was why they came here. And he was right with her, helped her with everything. But she was really the mover, prime mover. One of the libraries was named after her, Melba Bennett Library.
She was the first president of the Palm Springs Historical
Yes,
Society.
That's right.
In contrast, what was Auntie Pearl like?
Well, she was
also a strong lady.
A very strong. Yes, she was a very strong lady. She had a great sense of looking into the future and understanding what Palm Springs was going to be, and she was right. So she handled everything from a business-like standpoint and really made millions. Of course, her father was Judge McCallum, and of course she came here as a child and really was a native of Palm Springs.
Did you have much dealing with her personally?
Well, just knew her awfully well, that's all, and worked with her in many things. She was very helpful to the Palm Springs Women's Club. In fact, she gave the land that the Women's Club is sitting on. And then we raised the money to build the building, and it was the money was raised and completed before we ever started building the building. So we had no indebtedness.
Really got things done.
Yes, she really did. Mrs. Tom O'Donnell was one of our main ones at the Women's Club,
One doesn't hear too much about her. What was she?
A lovely lady, very prominent and very involved. She was very active in civic things as well as philanthropic things in Long Beach.
I see.
But she lived here all winter, or main part of the season. And she was very active, one of our first women's club presidents, and raised a lot of money for us.
Who were some of the other ladies who were involved in the women's club?
Well, Mrs. Penny, wife of the El Mirador man. And I'll tell you, our women's club roster read like a who's who of Palm Springs in those days. Mrs. Reed, Dr. Reed's wife, was very active. She was one of our first presidents. I was trying to think of who you might know, but
let me ask you about Catherine Finchy. She was a fellow teacher, and did you see much of Catherine?
Well, at various things. She belonged to the church, the same one that I did, and she was very active, of course, in town. In fact, she ran the sports events here in the winter, as well as teaching school. Basketball games were all Catherine Finchy's
did not know that.
little brainchild. And Catherine was she was a wonderful woman. And we see her now. Well, she's still a wonderful woman.
She is. She is indeed. She is. Bringing us up to date, closer to the war years, did that make a change in your life when, in the early 40s, for instance, when the El Mirador was converted to the hospital? Was the community changed greatly?
I didn't think so.
Was it evident?
Not. There were a lot of soldiers around all the time. The ferry command was out at the airport. The airport is now, and we had lots of soldiers and everything like that. But the town went on. The town helped. We had USO here and all of those things that went with the war effort. A lot of wonderful people came here through Torney Hospital, of course. And I used to sing up there all the time and entertained there a lot. Now also out the Ferry Command. I worked in the USO and so forth and so on.
Was this a time of change for the resort community overall in terms of more and more people?
Well, after the war was when we had the big onslaught of people coming in. You couldn't get a room during the war here. People opened their homes and rented bedrooms all over town. Anybody wanted to rent a bedroom anytime, they certainly could fill it. They had a little, I forget what they called it now. It was sort of a branch of the Chamber of Commerce that you just called in and said you had a room that you'd rent for a day or two or a week or a month or whatever you wanted, and they'd send somebody right out.
And what were you doing at this time? You were in the early 40s.
Let's see. Well, I went from a cashier at Lickens to librarian. I worked for Dorothy Bear.
Yes. So your life was reflected.
Busy as a bird dog.
Yeah, and what was happening.
Of course, my child was young then, and I didn't work all the time.
Well, we thank you very much for sharing with us the past, and you're still very much a part of the present and the future of this community.
Well, I don't know what I've said to you that's been entertaining, but
shared with us.
Happy to have told you what I could.
We thank you very much. It's been very informative and interesting. And thank you, Vi Watson.
You're most welcome.